The smell of burnt coffee and copper hit Lena before she even opened her eyes. She was not in her apartment. She knew that much before she registered anything else. The sheets were too smooth, the silence too deliberate, and there was no hum of the 6 a.m. Yonge Street bus rattling her window. There was nothing, just that smell, and the particular quality of light that comes through blackout curtains when it's already well past the time you should be somewhere. She sat up slowly. The room was the size of her entire floor at the Broadview walk-up. Floor-to-ceiling windows behind heavy charcoal drapes, a credenza that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent, and on the nightstand a glass of water and 2 white pills she did not remember asking for. She did not touch them. What she did, very calmly, was try to remember how she had arrived here. 41 hours earlier, Lena Marsh had been a bookkeeper, not a fancy one, not a CPA, not a financial controller, not anything with letters after her name that her mother could put on a Christmas card. She was the person who caught the mistakes after the mistakes had already been made, who sat in back offices with bad lighting and ran the numbers that nobody wanted to look at. For 7 years she had done this. For restaurants, for a small printing company, for a physiotherapy clinic that paid late 3 months running, for a real estate office that smelled like microwaved fish and broken promises, and for the last 2 years she had done it for Colton Developments. She should have paid more attention to what Colton Developments actually developed. She had. That was the problem. She had paid very close attention. The morning it all came apart was a Tuesday. Tuesdays were always the worst days, not bad enough to be notable, just bad enough to be exhausting. Lena had been at her desk at 7:15, cross-referencing invoices from a subsidiary account that didn't match anything in the main ledger. The subsidiary was called 3,847 Ontario Holdings. It appeared in the books 4 times across 2 fiscal years, always for services rendered, always vague, always between $80,000 and $120,000. There were no corresponding contracts. There was no paper trail she could find. There was just the number, sitting in the ledger like a splinter she couldn't stop tonguing. She had flagged it to her supervisor, Patrick, on a Monday. Patrick had told her it was above her pay grade. On Tuesday, Patrick called her into his office and told her the company was restructuring and her position had been eliminated. She had been given a box, the insulting kind, the kind with the company logo on the side, and asked to clear her desk by noon. What they had not anticipated, because people who work in development offices tend to underestimate bookkeepers, was that Lena had already photographed the ledger pages on her phone. Not because she'd planned anything, just because she was the kind of person who documented things. Her therapist called it hypervigilance. Lena called it being right more often than other people. She stood on King Street West at 12:03 with her logo box and her phone and absolutely no idea what to do next. What she should have done was go home. What she should have done was call the CRA tip line, or a lawyer, or her friend Dana, who worked in regulatory compliance and would have told her to slow down. What she did instead was walk 3 blocks south to a bar called The Still, order a rye and ginger she couldn't really afford, and sit at the end of the counter feeling the specific exhaustion of being a person who is always right about the wrong things. The bar was mostly empty at noon on a Tuesday. There was a couple at a booth, having a quiet, miserable argument. There was a man at the other end of the counter who had been there, she suspected, since before she arrived. He was reading something on his phone, and he looked like the kind of person who made rooms feel smaller without doing anything in particular. Dark jacket. Salt and pepper at the temples. A stillness about him that wasn't relaxed. It was deliberate, the way a building is still, the way a budget with no variance is still. She noticed him the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit the category you've put it in, and then she looked back at her drink. "You're going to get splinters doing that," he said, without looking up from his phone. She looked down. She had been peeling the edge of a cocktail napkin into strips without noticing, a nervous habit from childhood. Her mother used to slap her hand when she did it at the dinner table. "I'll live," she said. He looked up then. His eyes were grey. Not the romantic kind of grey that people describe in novels. Just grey, flat, like overcast February, like he'd seen enough to stop bothering with colour. "Bad morning," he said. "Elimination of position," she said, because for some reason that was easier than the longer version. Turned out knowing too much was a conflict of interest. He set his phone face down on the counter. What field? Bookkeeping. Something shifted in his expression that she couldn't quite read. It wasn't surprise. It was more like the particular stillness of a person who has just calculated something quickly and arrived at a number they weren't expecting. "What kind of books?" he said. She looked at him properly for the first time. He wasn't young. There was something in the set of his jaw that suggested he had stopped apologizing for things a long time ago. There were, she noticed, 2 faint scars on the back of his right hand. One old and wide, one newer and precise. The kind of scars that don't come from kitchen accidents. "Why?" she said. "Because I've been trying to fill the same position for 4 months, he said. "And everyone I've hired has either been incompetent or dishonest. I was fired for being too honest," she said flatly. "I know," he said. "I heard you tell the bartender." She hadn't realized she'd said it that loudly. She pressed her thumbnail into the cocktail napkin. "You're not actually hiring," she said. "This is the part where you pretend to be recruiting and then ask for my number." He looked at her with an expression that said he found this mildly tedious. "My name is Reacher," he said. He slid a card across the bar. It was matte black with no logo, just a name, E. Reacher, and a phone number. "I need someone who can look at numbers that don't add up and tell me specifically how they don't add up. Not someone who'll fix them to look right. Someone who'll tell me what's actually wrong." She picked up the card. "What kind of business?" "Import and logistics," he said. She should have left it there. She should have put the card in her logo box and gone home and eaten whatever was in her fridge and sent out updated CVs. Instead, she heard herself say, "What's the discrepancy?" He tilted his head slightly, the way you do when someone has said something that changes your assessment of them. "Thursday," he said. 9 a.m. The address is on the back." He left a 50 on the bar and walked out without looking back. She turned the card over. The address was in the financial district. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she finished her drink, tucked the card into her coat pocket, picked up her logo box and went home. She went on Thursday. She told herself it was professional curiosity. She told herself she was between positions, and this was due diligence. She told herself, while she was doing her hair in the bathroom mirror at 8:15, that she was a grown adult who could meet a stranger in a business district office for a job interview without it being a thing. The address was a floor of a glass tower on Bay Street. The lobby security knew her name before she said it. The elevator required a code that was texted to her phone at 8:58 a.m. exactly. The office she was escorted to had one window and no visible clutter and a desk so clean it looked like set dressing. Reacher was already there. He was on a call in a language she didn't recognize. Not French, not Spanish, something that moved differently. He ended it when she sat down and looked at her with the same flat grey eyes as the bar, same deliberate stillness, same sense of a person who had very little patience for time that wasn't being used efficiently. He put a binder on the desk. "Start at tab 4, he said. She opened it. Tab 4 was a set of financial statements for something called Meridian Freight Services. She started reading. He did not speak. She did not speak. Somewhere around the 3rd page she found the first thing that was wrong and circled it with the pen he'd left beside the binder without her asking. By the time she reached tab 9, she had circled 7 things and written 3 questions in the margin. He picked up the binder without comment and read her notes. She watched his eyes move across the page. He did not react to anything. "All 7 of those are intentional misdirection," he said. "None of them are the actual problem." "I know," she said. "The actual problem is in the receivables from the subsidiary account in tab 12. Someone's been running a shadow, float through what looks like legitimate freight billing. It's small, 2-3%, but it's consistent. Someone patient did this. Someone who knows auditors skim receivables." Silence. "You found that in 40 minutes, he said. "It's not that hard to find if you're looking for the boring parts," she said. "Most fraud hides in the boring parts because auditors skip them." He set the binder down. He was looking at her with an expression that was not warm, exactly. It was more like the recognition you get from a person who has been speaking a language no one else in the room understands and has suddenly met someone who responds in kind. The position pays $130, plus a non-disclosure agreement that is not negotiable, he said. You'll have access to accounts I don't give access to lightly. You will tell me exactly what you see. You will not tell anyone else anything. If you're the kind of person who has a problem with that, tell me now. $130 was $50,000 more than her last job. The non-disclosure was concerning in the specific way that all non-disclosures are concerning when you're being offered one in a building with coded elevators. What exactly does Meridian Freight service? She said. He looked at her steadily. Goods that need to move between specific parties without attracting attention, he said. I don't run drugs. I don't traffic people. What I do move is none of your concern beyond the numbers. The numbers are what I'm paying you for. She thought about the ledger pages on her phone. She thought about Patrick's face when he told her the position had been eliminated. She thought about the $86 in her checking account and the fact that her landlord had already called twice this month. Non-disclosure for how long? She said. Indefinitely. I want a severance clause, she said. If you terminate without cause, 3 months. He considered this for exactly 1 second. Done, he said. She took the job. She should clarify something. Before this goes any further, she was not stupid. She knew what goods that move without attracting attention meant in a building with coded elevators, in a room with no visible clutter, from a man with scars on his hands and eyes the color of February. She had grown up in Regent Park when it was still the old Regent Park, in a third-floor apartment where the heat worked sometimes, and the mailbox lock hadn't worked since 2003. She knew what people who operated outside the law looked like. She also knew what people who operated inside the law looked like, and she had catalogued enough of their receivables to understand that the gap between the two was mostly paperwork and better shoes. What she told herself was, I'm a bookkeeper. I look at numbers. Numbers don't have intent. What she didn't tell herself, because she was already aware of it. She was very curious about Reacher. Not in the way she'd been curious about the men she'd dated, which was always a kind of tentative, hoping to be surprised curiosity. This was more like the curiosity she got from a ledger that almost balanced. The sense that there was something underneath the surface that explained the variance, and that if she looked at it long enough she'd find it. For 3 months she worked. She came in at 8. She left at 6. She sat across from accounts that required 2 keys to open, and she found the things in them that were wrong, and she reported them to Reacher in plain language without editorializing. He read her reports without comment. He corrected 2 errors in her methodology in the first month, and acknowledged after the second month that she had not made any since. He did not compliment her. He did not chat. He brought her coffee sometimes, not asked, not announced, just a cup appearing at the edge of her desk. And she drank it without comment, because acknowledging small gestures was how people started owing each other things she couldn't afford to owe. The 5th time the coffee appeared, she said, without looking up. You take it black, yes, he said. Because it's efficient, she said. No variables. A pause. Yes, he said, and there was something in that pause that was almost, not quite, amusement. She looked up. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her when she found the shadow float in 40 minutes. Like she was a number he kept arriving at that wasn't what he expected. She looked back at the ledger. Your February freight invoices from the Vancouver depot have a 7-day lag that isn't seasonal, she said. Someone is holding them before processing. I need authorization to pull the depot communications. He gave it to her. She found what she was looking for in 3 days. A dispatcher at the Vancouver depot had been backdating invoices to smooth over delayed shipments. Nothing criminal, just sloppy. She wrote the report, submitted it, and did not think about the way he had looked at her in the doorway. She thought about it later. At home, in her apartment that no longer felt insufficient in the same way, she sat at her kitchen table and thought about it with the same careful attention she gave to ledgers. It was inconvenient information. She filed it under, not relevant to current position. Everything changed on a Wednesday in March, which she would later note was also a terrible day, because she was apparently destined to have her life restructured on days with no personality. She had arrived at the office to find it different. Not visibly different. The desk was still clean, the windows still faced the same direction, her coffee was still there. But 3 of Reacher's usual people were absent, and the 2 who remained were moving with the specific economy of people who are managing adrenaline. She recognized it. It was the energy of a room where something had already gone wrong. Reacher was on the phone. He looked up when she came in and held up one finger. Wait. She sat. She did not ask. She opened the account she'd been working on and started reading, because there was nothing useful about standing around catastrophizing. When he ended the call, he set the phone down very precisely on the desk and said, "We have a problem with the accounts," she said. "With a competitor," he said. "He's been buying information about our freight routing. Someone internal sold it." She thought about the Vancouver dispatcher. How long has it been happening? 8 months, based on the pattern. He was looking at her steadily. "I need you to find the pattern in the financials. Payments, transfers, anything that doesn't fit someone on our payroll." "I can do that," she said. "It'll take me a few days." "You have until Friday," he said. "Saturday the situation changes." She didn't ask what changed Saturday. She took the files he gave her and she went to her desk and she started looking for the boring parts. She found it in 36 hours, a series of small transfers just under the reporting threshold, moving through a personal account attached to one of their contract drivers. The driver's name was Sutton. He had been with the organization for 3 years. The payments started 11 months ago, slightly before the competitor's pattern shifted. She brought the report to Reacher at 7:30 on Friday morning. He read it in silence. She watched his jaw set. "How certain are you?" he said. "The math is certain," she said. "What you do with it isn't my department." He looked at her for a moment. "You're not going to ask what happens to Sutton?" "No," she said. "I'm a bookkeeper. I found the discrepancy. I'm not responsible for the balance of the ledger." Something moved through his expression. It wasn't approval exactly. It was something more complicated than that. "You should go home," he said. "Don't come in Monday. I'll text you when it's resolved." She went home. She did not sleep well. Not because she was afraid, or not only because she was afraid, but because the ledger in her mind kept running the numbers on a problem she hadn't assigned a category to yet. He texted on Sunday night. One word. Resolved. She came back Monday. She had expected things to feel different. They didn't. The desk was clean. Her coffee was there. The accounts were waiting. Reacher was in his office on a call in the other language. Everything was exactly as it had been, except that when he finished the call and walked past her desk, he stopped. "You didn't ask," he said. "I know," she said. "Most people ask," he said. "I'm not most people," she said. "I'm the one you hired specifically because I understand that some information is structural and some information is noise." He looked at her for a long moment. "The 3-month severance," he said. "I'd have paid it." "I know," she said. "I was never worried about that." "Then, what were you worried about?" he said. She looked up from the ledger. This was a different kind of question. She recognized it the way you recognize a line item that shouldn't be in a particular account. It was the right number, but it was in the wrong column. "Nothing I'm going to tell you at 8 in the morning," she said. He almost smiled. It was a near thing, the suggestion of it, the shift in the corner of his mouth before it settled back into the usual flatness. But she caught it. She had been watching his face for 6 months with the attention she gave to numbers, and she caught it. He went back to his office. She went back to the ledger. The thing she was worried about, she thought, turning a page, was that the variance she'd been tracking in the margin of her personal ledger for the last 3 months had stopped looking like noise. It looked like a pattern. April was the month she stopped pretending. Not all at once. It was incremental, the way most things that matter are incremental. A single line item shifting, then another, then a whole column that has to be reclassified. She stopped pretending that the coffee was just coffee. She stopped pretending that the way he stopped in the doorway of her office at the end of the day to ask one question, always exactly one question, never small talk, never preamble, was just management style. She stopped pretending that when he said, "Your methodology is sound in that flat," even voice it didn't register the same way a compliment from anyone else would have registered. She was not naive about what she was doing. She was an adult woman working for a man who moved goods that required discretion, in a building with coded elevators, under a non-disclosure that she had negotiated herself. She had grown up knowing exactly how much sentiment cost people who couldn't afford it. What she thought was, "I can feel something and not act on it. I've done that my whole life. I'm excellent at it." What she also thought, in the quieter part of the same mind, the problem with being excellent at finding patterns is that once you've found one, you cannot unfind it. The thing that broke the balance was not dramatic. It never is. It was a Thursday evening in late April, and she had stayed late to close out a quarterly reconciliation before the weekend. The office was empty. She had kicked off her shoes and was sitting cross-legged in her chair in a way she would never have done if anyone could see her, eating a granola bar she'd found in the bottom of her bag, when Reacher came back. He had clearly been somewhere. The jacket was different. There was something around the set of his shoulders that was not quite tiredness. It was the look of a person who had finished something they had needed to finish for a long time and was not sure yet what to do with the silence that followed. He stopped when he saw her. She did not move. She had learned months ago that stillness was a language he responded to. "Still here," he said. "Quarterly closing," she said. She looked at him more carefully. "You should sit down." "I'm fine," he said. "That's not what I said," she said. "I said you should sit down." He sat. Not because he was told, she understood that about him by now, but because the suggestion had, for once, aligned with what he actually needed. He sat in the chair across from her desk, which nobody sat in because he had no visitors to his office, and he looked at the window with its view of Lower Bay Street and the particular orange-grey of Toronto in April after rain. She finished her granola bar. She did not say anything. She had learned that silence for him was not a problem to be filled. After a while he said, "My brother handled collections for 8 years. He died in January." She hadn't known he had a brother. "I'm sorry," she said. "He was better at it than anyone I've hired since," he said. It was not sentimental. It was a statement of fact, the same way she reported on the accounts. Something in that precision was the most honest thing he'd said to her in 6 months. "He must have trusted you," she said. Reacher turned and looked at her. "Why would you say that?" "Because that's the kind of work you only do for someone you trust," she said. "It's not a skills question. It's a loyalty question." He was quiet for a long moment. He said, "I made the numbers too important and the people not important enough." "He wasn't wrong," she said. Then, because she was who she was, "For what it's worth, you've been getting better." He looked at her with the same expression she'd been cataloguing for months, the one she'd stopped categorizing as unreadable because she'd been reading it for 6 months and she knew what it meant. She just hadn't wanted to write it in the ledger. "Lena," he said. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said anything. You were about to say something that would change the working relationship," she said. "And I need this job. You could get another job," he said. "Not one that pays $130. I'd pay $160, he said. She looked at him steadily. "That's not the point, and you know it." "What's the point?" he said. She should have said, "The point is professional boundaries." She should have said, "The point is the non-disclosure agreement." What she said instead, because she was tired, because it was 9 o'clock on a Thursday, and she'd been doing this particular accounting for months, and she was exhausted by the weight of it, was, "The point is that the last time I trusted someone who had things I needed, I stopped being a person to them and started being a convenience, and I am not doing that again." Silence. "I had a driver sell routing information for 8 months, he said slowly, because the man buying it was paying him enough to move his mother into assisted living. I found that out after. I didn't punish him." She stared at him. "That's not in any report I've seen." "No," he said. "I solved it differently." She kept looking at him. "You're telling me this because I don't think you're a convenience," he said. "I think you're the most structurally sound person I've ever worked with, and I am very aware that those are not the same thing as what I should be saying right now. And I'm saying it anyway because you just told me the truth and I owe you the same." The window behind him was showing the orange-grey sky turning to actual dark. She thought about every ledger she had ever balanced. She thought about the $86 in her checking account last October. She thought about what it meant to be a person who found patterns, and what it meant to find one that wasn't in the accounts. "I'm going to finish the quarterly closing," she said, "and then I'm going to go home, and you're going to give me the weekend before this conversation happens again." He stood. "That's fair," he said. She looked at her screen. "Reacher," she said before he could go. "Yes," he said. For what it's worth, she said, he was right about the people. She did not look up. She heard him stop in the doorway the same way he always stopped, except this time the silence felt different. It felt like a number that had just moved from one column to the right one. Then he left. She finished the quarterly closing. She went home. She took the weekend. She gave herself exactly 48 hours to look at the full ledger and make a decision about it, with the same clarity she gave everything else. Here is what she knew. She was not a person who made decisions based on what she wanted. She was a person who made decisions based on what was structurally sound. Her whole life had run on this principle, and it had kept her from a number of disasters she could see in retrospect. Here is what she also knew. The quarterly closing was balanced. Every discrepancy she had ever found in Reacher's accounts, she had found because she understood that numbers don't lie. People lie, and the numbers show you where. And every number she had looked at in the last 6 months, in the account that was her own judgment, kept arriving at the same figure. She called him on Sunday evening. "Monday," she said. "Before I open the accounts, I'll be there," he said. She closed her phone and looked at her kitchen table and thought, well, that's going to change the ledger. It did. Not all at once. Things that are structurally sound don't happen all at once. They accumulate, line by line, until the balance is undeniable. What she told people, the few people she told, "I work in logistics for a firm that requires discretion, and the man I'm with is the kind of person who notices when you're cold before you say anything, and does not treat that as a small thing." What she did not tell people, that she had run the numbers on every version of her life she could imagine. And this was the one where the accounts balanced. Not because it was safe. It was not safe. It would never be entirely safe, and she knew that with the same flat clarity she knew anything else. But because the alternative was a life where she kept the books perfectly and never put herself in the ledger at all. She had been doing that long enough. 6 months after the Thursday evening in April, she was at her desk. Still the same desk, still the same accounts, still the coffee that appeared without announcement, when Reacher set a folder on the corner of her workspace. She looked at it. "What's this?" "Meridian is restructuring," he said. "The freight operations are being folded into a holding company. Your role is changing." He paused. "I need a financial director, not a bookkeeper, someone who sees the whole ledger, not just the accounts I give her." She opened the folder. The title on the first page read, "Director of Financial Operations, Reacher Holdings, Inc." The number at the bottom of the page was not 160. She looked up at him. "The people were more important than the numbers," she said. "That's what your brother was telling you." "Yes," he said. "This is you saying you understand that now. This," he said, "is me saying I understood it about 8 months ago and have been waiting for the appropriate professional moment." She looked at the folder. She looked at the number. She thought about Regent Park and the broken mailbox lock and the $86 and every ledger she had ever balanced for someone else's benefit. She picked up her pen. She signed it.